Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story,
Hello,
a
and
podcast
welcome to
produced by the
episode
Women in
15 of the
Manufacturing
Women in
Association.
Manufacturing
Be sure to
Hear Her
share,
Story
review,
podcast.
and subscribe to
My
Hear
name
Her
is
Story
Allison
on
Reyes,
Apple,
founder and
Google,
president of the Women in
Spotify, or wherever
Manufacturing
you like to listen.
Association and Education Foundation. And I am thrilled to have the pleasure of introducing our listeners this month to our guest, Alla Woodson. Alla is the General Manager of Life Care Solution Services at GE Healthcare, one of WiM's 260 plus corporate members. Alla is a first-generation immigrant to the United States from the former USSR, now the Russian Federation. Welcome, Alla.
Thank you so much, Allison. It is a pleasure and honor to be here.
We are thrilled to have you and to get the experience of hearing your story today on our podcast. So thanks so much for taking the time. I'm sure out of a very busy schedule to join us.
Oh, it's a welcome respite. I am so happy to see you and so happy to be here. And WiM rocks.
Well, thank you. And, I so much had the pleasure of getting to meet you this past winter at our Winter Leadership Conference in sunny Florida, and was so inspired by the conversation we had there that I was just thrilled to get to continue our conversation and learn more during our Hear Her Story podcast. So this podcast, again, is intended to share stories of leading and inspirational women like yourself. And we usually like to start our conversations getting to know a little bit about your life story, your background, where you grew up, what were those things in your early life that inspired you, and kind of tell us a little bit about those things.
Absolutely. Again, thank you, Allison. Great to be here. And, when you said, for the first time in my life, when you were introducing me and said, hey, first generation immigrant from USSR, former Russian Federation, I felt myself tense up a little bit, not because of what you said, but it's pretty obvious that times are very tough. So actually, for the first time in my life, being a Russian speaker and being born in Moscow is something that I'm not necessarily ashamed of, but that's something that makes me very thoughtful of explaining my background, right? To get this out of the way, I grew up in a very anti-communist and anti-Putin family. So not a big fan. I actually have a family of refugees in our house right now, supporting people of Ukraine. And I'm actually, both of my grandmothers came from Ukraine. I'm of Ukrainian, Russian, and Jewish descent. So Ashkenazi Jewish descent, which actually was a double whammy growing up in the Soviet Union, being from a family of engineers, anti-communists of Jewish descent. That was a loaded meeting because in the Soviet Union, there were two things that were very pronounced outside, adherence to communism and trying to build a communist society, which was an utter utopia. The other piece of it, it's unfortunately, Soviet Union has always been on a state level anti-Semitic. So you kind of always knew in the back of your mind that you were a citizen of second sort. There are certain things that were not open to people of Jewish descent. And when I say Jewish, it also means different things in different parts of the world. In the United States, it typically means somebody of Jewish faith. Well, that's not the case in Europe, and specifically Eastern Europe. Just like Hitler discriminated against Jews based on the ethnic background, the same things were happening with Stalin and the Soviet Union. So my background, and maybe it explains a lot of how I am and what am I, and how I think is I grew up in a dissident background. So basically knowing that the system around you is not something that your parents and your family supports, but you have to be quiet about it. And you also have to be able to be a good human being, to understand history and be open to other experiences outside your own country and different philosophies, right? So that's my background. I, again, grew up in the family. I was born and raised in Moscow in a family of engineers, metallurgists. So always been, near and dear. The manufacturing piece and the heavy metals were always near and dear to me in my childhood. I grew up, my mom and dad, both quite educated in physics and chemistry, spoke several languages. We read a lot of books, so we didn't have much in terms of material things, but we did have a pretty substantial library. And I grew up reading, I grew up speaking with my parents, learning the alternative history, the true history, not necessarily through the prism of what we were being taught in school, with the ideology that was the sign of times. And then the other piece of it was I grew up with metallic the pieces and basically helping my mom write the measurements of metals on the millimeter paper. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's basically a paper with very fine grading on it, and you just have to write in the number. So I remember that from my early childhood. So I was exposed to chemistry and physics from early childhood, and I'm the only non-engineer in my family, sadly. So my parents are still trying to figure out what the heck management and marketing is and business administration. So my mom and dad are physicist chemists, and then my sister, I only have one sister, 9 years older than me. She was a computer programmer by her first education and a lawyer by her second. So I'm the only one who actually did not get educated and didn't finish my education in Russia or Soviet Union. How did I end up being here? I actually grew up wanting to get the heck out of Soviet Union. It was the dream of freedom. My parents were dreaming of actually leaving the country and potentially either immigrating or at least getting to see the world. I actually wanted to be a flight attendant. We used to say stewardess. We're not supposed to say that anymore, but that's what I thought. Stewardesses were tall and pretty and blonde, which is not the case. You guys can't see me, but I'm the opposite of that. But they also could travel the world. And that's what I wanted to be able to do. I knew growing up as a girl in the Soviet Union that I probably would not be allowed to be a pilot. And I also knew that as a female of Jewish descent, I probably would not be able to go to diplomatic school because Jews had high defection rates, so they were not really allowed to do certain professions. So I figured flight attendant was kind of flying under the radar, and I would be able to travel and see the world. Be careful what you wish for. I am on the plane quite a bit. Nowadays, I'm not a flight attendant, but I certainly have chosen a career that took me around the globe, and I've been very fortunate to visit many countries. So that's the background. As far as how I ended up immigrating, I actually was very fortunate because I was a teenager when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991. And different opportunities were available at that time, versus what my sister, for example, experienced being a little bit older. So we actually had exchange programs at the time, not really an exchange. It was very one-sided, so not a lot of people came to Russia, but out of Russia, out of Ukraine, out of the former Soviet republics, we were able to actually apply to American and British colleges and universities and high school programs. And I actually ended up, I was very purposefully, hunting for those programs, and some of them were a little rigged. Some of them were actually, you could pass the academic tests and you would get in. And that's what happened. I actually got into one of the exchange programs that was sponsored by UNESCO and Moscow University. And it was a high school exchange program with the United States in 1995. Still remember that like it was yesterday. I got to go to a high school to 12th grade in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Missouri was not necessarily, I didn't know where Missouri was or what it was, but you get to go to the family, at the time a host family, that read your profile on paper. There was no electronic email, there were no emails, no Skype, right? So they read your letter, they look at your picture, and they basically say, hey, I want this kid in my family for a year, which I think is an incredible thing to do. Very thankful to the family. To this day. So I ended up going to high school in the United States in 1995, graduated from high school there, and actually got into college from there as well. So that's my story here in the US started with education. My intent was to study here, get my higher education, apply for a job, and stick around and grow my career in the United States, potentially internationally. One piece that was not planned, I wasn't planning on meeting a boy that early on. I mean, I was dating, but I wasn't planning to meet a husband. My first year of college, that did happen. So I met a very cute boy. His name is Alla Woodson. We just celebrated our 23rd wedding anniversary on May 8th.
Congratulations.
Thank you. He's still my sweetheart, and we have 2 kids now, a 16-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy, and a dog who is hopefully going to stay quiet while we're doing the interview. The rest is history. So I ended up sticking around, not just for my career, but also because I fell in love and got married at an early age to a Tennessee boy who's never had a passport before he met me. So fast forward 25 years or so, we've lived in 3 or 4 countries. I'm losing count. We've moved probably about 10 times at least for predominantly my career. He's a phenomenal partner. He's a stay-at-home dad at this point. He was earlier on in our relationship, he was a police officer. He is now retired, and he is helping me do what I do and what I love to do, work and bring value to the society as a professional woman.
Excellent. What a story, Alla. I mean, gosh, there's so many places to start, but I think first, to come to the United States for this pursuit of education and to graduate in a country that you're just newly landed in, and then to experience kind of college as that probably deep introduction to the United States. As you did that, did your family come over, or have they ever come over since? Are they still in Russia?
Fortunately, not in Russia anymore. So I was the only one who moved.
Okay.
And it was now, as a mom of an almost 17-year-old, I understand what my family must have gone through by letting me go. Because
Right.
I at the thought of my kid maybe going, to Chicago Art Institute down the street from us, right? So, and potentially not living at home. They let me go across the ocean without having the connection means that we have today, because one
Right.
was like $85 and my parents were making about $150 per month. So that was not something. So I still have the letters, which is wonderful. So no, I came alone and I stayed alone. And the first time my parents got to visit the United States was for my wedding in 1999. Fortunately,
Wow.
I did meet my husband before that, because he and I came over in 1997 for the summer because he wanted to meet my parents, and he was my then boyfriend. They fell in love with him. To this day, when my mom calls, she asks about him more than she wants to know about anybody else. So they have a wonderful relationship. And my parents, so for the first time, their first time in the United States was in McKenzie, Tennessee, which is rural Tennessee, 2 days before Zach and I got married. So they were part of the wedding. And the fun part was that they actually absolutely fell in love with his parents. They were the same generation, listened to the same music. And Zach and I were a little hurt because I'm pretty sure that we were not the center of attention during that time. So my in-laws and my parents really hit it off and became lifelong friends. So very lucky in that respect. So my parents do not live here. Now, my parents later on in 2008, as things were clamping down in Russia, as we started seeing that there was about a 10-year period of chaos and democracy. And then when Putin started clamping kind of down on freedom, and it was pretty clear where this was heading in 2008, my parents emigrated and went to Czech Republic. So they actually are Czech citizens. They learned the language in their 70s. They passed the exam. Very fortunate that they are not in Russia and not in Ukraine. So they are in Czech Republic. And then my sister and her family, her 3 kids, her husband, they followed, and they all actually are European citizens. And then since my sister moved to Spain. So my family is scattered across the world, and I certainly have a lot of friends in both Ukraine and Russia, and hence the folks that are staying with us, and some folks who are trying to help to get out. It's still.
The Women in Manufacturing Association will host our 11th annual summit as a hybrid event this October 4th through the 6th. The summit is WiM's largest signature event, with more than 700 industry professionals expected to be in attendance. Join us in Cleveland, Ohio, or digitally from your own home or office for 3 days filled with plant tours at leading manufacturing facilities, roundtable discussions on timely topics, and inspiring keynotes from leaders across the industry. Save your spot before July 1st to take advantage of our early bird registration rate. Sign up today by going to www.womeninmanufacturing.org/events and searching the keyword summit.
Still very near and dear to my heart, but I don't have any immediate family left in the region.
The Women in Manufacturing Association will host our 11th annual summit as a hybrid event this October 4th through the 6th. The summit is WiM's largest signature event, with more than 700 industry professionals expected to be in attendance. Join us in Cleveland, Ohio, or digitally from your own home or office for 3 days filled with plant tours at leading manufacturing facilities, roundtable discussions on timely topics, and inspiring keynotes from leaders across the industry. Save your spot before July 1st to take advantage of our early bird registration rate. Sign up today by going to www.womeninmanufacturing.org/events and searching the keyword summit.
So you mentioned, your family's moved a few times over the course of your career. So what types of positions, after college did you pursue? And what have been those moves like? And, I'd also love you to touch upon perhaps, that decision making that can sometimes be tough. And I hear it from so many leading women in industry that at a certain point, you look at kind of both the partners' careers, and sometimes that tough decision has to be made of, who's going to continue to rise or to advance, and maybe who's going to take a step back or pause in their career trajectory. But let's first start with the position and how you first got into this industry, and then some of those positions and what they were that took you around the globe.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Both great questions. The one, remember I wanted to be a flight attendant, didn't quite end up there. I did understand pretty early on, probably in my late teens, that I wanted to study economics, business, marketing, management, and potentially actually take my career in the direction of law, so international trade law. For some reason sounded very sexy to me, for two reasons: because it was international and because lawyers made a lot of money. So I was a naive immigrant, and I knew I was going to have to work hard. But what I initially got into before industrial, before where I am now, it was banking. So I actually spent 16 years in retail banking. How I chose to be a banker was actually a funny story. It was not very strategic. My first official job, not counting babysitting and babysitting, I was a sandwich artist in Subway, because a friend of mine was graduating and there was an opening in Subway, and I interviewed, and that's where I started working. Across the parking lot from Subway in McKenzie, Tennessee, which was the only Subway in town, population 6,000, was a bank branch for McKenzie Banking Company, a local community bank. And another friend of mine was graduating. They were looking for a bank teller. I was getting paid $4.75 an hour minimum wage, and the bank was offering $6.50 an hour. So that was the decision. I was very lucky to get a job in the bank, and that's how my banking career started. And I worked every job imaginable in the banking system, from a bank teller, factoring department secretary, IT, back office, reconciliation, accounting, internal audit, to a bank CEO in the span of 16 years. So predominantly grew through the operations track, always customer facing. Turned out my passion was to take care of customers, and to really help the internal processes and systems and people and behaviors work together in a way that helps customers derive the most value and be loyal customers. So I've always had this passion for connecting customer experience with the internal processes and systems. And that's my sweet spot to this day. So again, grew up in banking on the operational side. Call centers, actually, was a telesales agent at one point. Difficult job. When your hand starts shaking when you're reaching out for the receiver. Back then we didn't have headphones yet, because you're going to get some rejection, and kind of getting past that and persevering is a great school of life. But I grew up on the operational side in banking, and then actually switched to the commercial side. So I've been in sales and then P&L management. So as a chief operations officer, and then CEO of a bank. And at that point of time back in Europe. So I started my banking career in the United States, and then moved back to Russia in 2002, working for a bank and financial holding, creating their cross-sell and upsell opportunities for several banks and finance companies. So that was kind of my early to early mid career. On the banking side, I did actually not forget about the law school, and I was planning to go and study law a few years after college graduation, just needed the money. So worked for a few years in Washington, D.C. Actually, it was a slight deviation from banking. I worked for what's now Gartner consulting company, but also on the call center and then research side. And I got a job as a paralegal, got into Georgetown University, which was one of my target schools, and was planning to start studying law in 2002. But that's when a phone call from Russia came. And at the time, things were booming in Russia. And they offered me a job that I first declined. But then, long story short, they made an offer I couldn't refuse. And I figured I'll take a academic leave from law school for at least a year, go do 1 year contract in Russia, come back. And that 1 year turned into first 3.5 years in that company. And then actually GE Capital, General Electric, my current employer, found me in Russia. and they hired me for my first job in GE in January 2006, leading customer service in GE Money Bank Russia, which was a new acquisition that time. And that's where I started my 16 plus year career in GE. So that was kind of the second chapter of my career, still in banking, but I ended up in this wonderful multinational company that had obviously the banking arm, but also a very large and respected industrial arm. So my path to manufacturing industry was through GE and going from capital to then GE Lighting to then global operations that served multiple GE companies, including oil and gas, power, healthcare, and lighting. And then I actually left GE for like 5 minutes for about a year. Worked for Life Fitness here in Chicago, which was also an industrial company producing exercise equipment, part of WiM Corporation. But then I couldn't stay away. I'm a boomerang. I came back to GE Healthcare 3 years ago. So that was kind of the second part of my career now, I guess, since 2013 or so. I've been in, so almost 10 years now on the industrial side of GE.
And so what has that experience been like to be in the industrial side of GE, having started in finance, applying much of your expertise and skills in that area to now GE Healthcare? What have been your observations, or have there been any uniqueness or I guess unique experiences as you've been working with GE Healthcare?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, healthcare is just an incredible industry. I'm very lucky to be part of it, especially nowadays. The last couple of years have been crazy, somewhat fun, tough, fantastic learning, and very humbling. First and foremost, this is probably the first industry I work in that I am fully, my heart, mind, and everything, I'm fully in. I see, it's very easy to see what you do and what your colleagues do, how that impacts people's lives in a very positive way, from diagnostics and disease prevention to helping people in the most acute health situations, to being able to, our company just sent equipment, $4.5 million worth of equipment to Ukraine, right, to help people in the moments that matter, right? So I get a little teary-eyed when I think about this, but this is connecting to a higher purpose. I guess I'm getting older, it's becoming more and more important, and I found this in healthcare. And at the same time, it still has the intellectual challenge and the complexity and the commercial aspects, as well as the customer experience aspects that I've learned throughout my career in various industries, right? So there are certain things that are very specific to the healthcare industry that I'm in. There's also the piece that is, I think, consistent no matter which industry you're in. If you start thinking and caring about thinking about and caring about the customer first, and think about what is your customer looking for, what is the customer experience that they expect, and then you build backwards from that. Well, how do you need to transform? And typically it's transformation, because things never stay the same. How do you transform the operational processes, systems, behaviors, and culture within the organization to deliver that optimal customer experience and to deliver continuous improvement? That actually, the formula and how you go about it is not that terribly different, whether you're in banking or in lighting or in exercise equipment business or in healthcare, right? It's all those, that trifecta connects people, process, systems, and how that culminates in the optimal customer experience, in my mind, is consistent from industry to industry. And there are many things that you do right, left, look, you learn, and you don't reinvent the wheel, right? So that's been probably kind of the connecting point throughout my career of thinking how those elements come together to provide optimal customer experience.
Without customers, most of us don't have businesses or don't have jobs. And, it's that mantra since I think my first job very early on, or one of my first jobs working at the Gap, for gosh sakes, was, it was about the customer experience from the time they walked into the retail store to when they're trying on jeans at the jean wall to the seasonal sweaters, whatever it may be. It's about that customer experience. And I think connecting, as you said, that people and processes to make sure that you have the right processes in place to deliver that best or exemplary customer experience is so important.
100%. You just said Gap. I just thought a fun memory is my senior thesis in college was Abercrombie and Fitch postmodernism in marketing. So as part of my senior thesis, I got to visit all the Abercrombie and Fitch stores in Nashville and Memphis, Tennessee, back in late 90s when it was really popular, right? That the concept was popular, just looking at the concept of their stores and how they take care of their customers, how they attract young people, because predominantly they were catering to high school kids and college kids. And now what I realize with fear and awe is that Abercrombie and Fitch is still around and is very popular on people my age, so they're mid-40s and up. So, so the brand aged with us, right?
Right.
Knows what ANF is. I don't think she would care.
Right. Yeah. And I have a 16 and 15-year-old as well. And it's funny because those brands, and again, this is a bit ancillary, but those brands that were big when we were growing up, they still resonate with me, but not as much still to my daughter's age range. And it's funny because I go into one of the stores that she prefers, and from the time I walk in, whether it be the scent, the music, the staging of product, I'm immediately not their ideal customer.
No.
It's a turn off for me, all of those things. And so they obviously are doing their due diligence and market research to make sure they're tailored for my daughter's experience, my son's experience, rather than me at the 40-something experience.
Absolutely.
They know that I'm not their customer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So as you talk about, healthcare, and obviously, healthcare in that industry and the connected manufacturing to healthcare have been dramatically impacted by the pandemic over the past few years, as it has, transitioned to be providing different types of products and services for an urgent way and in a more rapid way for customers. And obviously, you folks are touching equipment, product, services that are life-saving and life essential for so many customers. As you think about your day-to-day work, what does a day in the life look like for your current role and responsibility at GE Healthcare?
Yeah, and it's transformed quite a bit, obviously over the last couple of years. So I am very fortunate to be in a very innovative part of the company where we have, on the one hand, a business that is over 100 years old. So our anesthesia machines have been on the market for over 100 years. So anesthesia machines, baby incubators, baby warmers, right? That's the side of the business I'm working on. Then we have patient monitoring, diagnostic cardiology, ventilators. So unfortunately, people know very well what the ventilators are nowadays. With that, you have kind of older type of equipment that existed for a while, but then you have the layer of digital technology, because it's all about patient data and it's about aggregating the enormous amount of data to improve patient outcomes. That's what the part of the business I'm in all about. We also have the imaging part of the business, which is also about aggregating data throughout the patient's journey and making sure that the diagnosis is the right one to help tailor the treatment to cure many life-threatening conditions or help patients live through the chronic conditions. So the piece of the business I'm in is high acuity. It's life-saving, like you said, but it's also nowadays, as we think through the patient journey and the clinician journey, it is about how do we make the workflows in the hospital and outside the hospital. Right now, the treatment is moving from hospital to home. How does that continuum, the patient care continuum, work, and how do we make clinicians work easier, right? How do we improve patient outcomes by helping clinicians? That's what we are about. It's fascinating. It's a lot of learning, it's complex, but really breaks down to patient outcomes and customer outcomes. And how do you connect the two? How do you connect the data? How do you connect technology into one workflow, right? So that's the piece of the business I am in. Now I am running the service arm of this. So service arm across all those segments. And how do we make sure that our equipment and solutions, software solutions and hardware, are there at the time when the clinicians need them to take care of the customers? There are no surprises. Or if their patients, there are no surprises that the equipment and or solutions are operational, predictable. And in our case, it's also about making sure that a lot of this equipment is networked, that the network is safe, and the networks are safe from the cybersecurity perspective, right? So taking care of those solutions to bring positive outcomes to patients and their families through making clinicians' lives easier is where I am. So that's the piece I'm in. So that means that my days are never typical. So I think about long-term, short-term, midterm. So my team is focused on developing service solutions and offerings that are around our product portfolio beyond just break fix. There's some pretty straightforward things. You have to have parts and making sure that the equipment works, but beyond break fix, what's coming 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road, and how do we wrap our services to ensure the optimal customer outcomes in that new world? So that's the long-term strategic piece of my job, which I just find fascinating and a lot of fun. I'm fortunate to have people who are way smarter than me working on my team. So engineers and marketing and product specialists and people who understand each segment very deeply and how that all comes together. So we have the product and service roadmaps that we're building and executing on. Then you have, obviously I have revenue responsibility, right? So we have to make sure that we drive our revenue targets, margin targets, so we can reinvest into the business growth. And then, of course, there's the short-term operational aspects. We live in a crazy world. We are very constrained from the supply chain standpoint. I think everyone who's listening probably is, wiping a bead of sweat off their forehead right now, because we're all in a very tough fulfillment environment. We are like many companies, we are struggling with, we don't have any shortage of orders. We're struggling to fulfill those orders, right? So the balancing act of taking care of your customers with back orders on parts. How do you do that? So we obviously have customer escalations and working with engineering teams. What can we do in this supply chain environment and complex component issues? How do we survive in the meantime and help our customers do well?
Yeah, it's a challenge time with the supply chain issues. Has that caused your company to look at reshoring, or have you seen more reshoring happening because of the recent supply chain issues?
We've looked at supplier resiliency models, right? We go much deeper than we used to in terms of not just working with tier 1 suppliers, but going deeper to tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. I don't know if there's anything under the sun we haven't tried yet, right? So in terms of just thinking from upstream, how we design products differently and how we find substitutes to working on the sourcing side and the procurement side. And I have a phenomenal friend and a colleague, Carrie Yule. She's our chief procurement officer. I don't know how she handles it, but just such a tremendous pressure on her and her organization to help us out. So I mean, we can talk for hours about all of the things that we're doing to
right
situation. I don't know if anybody found a successful formula yet.
Right.
So
I think, as you said, it's caused companies to get innovative and creative and try lots of different things as you're not only evaluating suppliers, but looking at their contingency plans and their direct suppliers. So, I mean, I think it's caused a lot of pause and reflection for companies. And as well as you said, just getting back to basics, how are these products and components engineered? And can you find replication in some of those parts and components so that, you have less potential suppliers or less complexity? So I think, I think it's taken a great pause for many companies and a reevaluation of, again, how does manufacturing and the sourcing process happen? And we have heard some examples of companies who have begun to reshore some of their products and services, or sourcing closer to home, or find more suppliers closer to home and manufacturing operations, just because of the disruption and the shortage that's happened over the last few years.
100%. We're trying all that, and I wish there was a silver bullet, right?
Right.
Now, one additional complexity, if you think about healthcare industry, we're very heavily regulated for a good reason.
Right.
Safety is key. So certain things that you can't really change that quickly, especially in the product design or FDA's approval, 510K approval. So there are certain things that we have to do, again, for a good reason, because our products touch customers and patients directly, right? And they're life sustaining. So there are certain things we perhaps can't move as fast as some other industries and be as innovative. But we're certainly, I mean, I just, my hats off to not just to our sourcing and manufacturing teams that are there every day still. It's an unprecedented crisis. It's not just a acute crisis mode. It's 2 years of continuous crisis, right? So things are happening all across. So I just hats off to that, to that part of the company, as well as to our engineers who are having to do things that are very uncomfortable for them, right? That's
Right.
not typically, because the cycle of development in healthcare industry is quite long. And now we're having to move faster and just connect those dots faster. So, you asked me, I didn't answer your question. You asked me what my typical day is like. There is no typical day, other than the fact that typically it's 6:30 a.m., 7 a.m., which I'm not a morning person, so not my favorite. I, fall out of bed and I'm on calls already. We actually back to the office 3-4 days a week. So we're in hybrid model, which I actually love, because I love being able to see people, and I love the flexibility of being able to work from home if and when I need it. And that actually loops into your previous question: how do you balance it all with family, and how, with your spouse, and how do you make it all work? I do think that the hybrid model is, when you have that freedom of shaping what your workday is like, to a certain extent, it does help juggle, the family and the work responsibilities. But it also makes my work very exciting. There is no typical day, other than the fact that typically my calls with Asia are early in the morning, and then you move on to Europe, Middle East, and then you move on to the United States, and then you frantically start doing emails in the evening. It also depends on the cycles. When you're in the budgeting cycle, long-term strategy cycle, there's, you spend more hours on long-term versus short-term, or vice versa. I'm also fortunate to have an incredible team where they're really my partners. And we have obviously typical cadence of meetings where, you have not necessarily like manufacturing daily stand-up meetings, but we have some similar lean type OpMex where you divide and conquer and make sure that we all move in sync. Right? So that's not a typical day, not a boring day, but high level. I love it. I mean, I love it. And I'm able to do that thanks to my husband, to your earlier question, because he is taking all these responsibilities, 99% of our home responsibilities on his shoulders. And to your earlier point as well, how do you balance this, and how do you make those career decisions? In our case, I think it was pretty well understood from day one when we met that I didn't come to the United States to be a housewife, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have a lot of friends who are, and it's the hardest job ever. I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm too chicken to do it. It's a lot of work. I did come here to build a career and to, make an impact on the world and live an interesting life. And in my mind, the interesting life is professional life. So my husband knew who he was marrying. And he also had a career early on in law enforcement, but we did have a couple of tough conversations on where to move, for example, right? Because when you move overseas with an American husband, it's pretty clear he's not going to have a law enforcement career there. So at some point we did have that conversation of how comfortable would he be a stay-at-home dad. I turned out to be very lucky. He is not only comfortable with being an at-home dad, he's probably the best father. I mean, my dad is really cool. His dad is really cool, but my husband is a very good father. He's very close with our kids, and he's just turned out to be that, the lid to my pot, as one of my friends says. Very lucky in that respect. I wouldn't be able, it's the way we look at it, it's not my career, it's our career. It takes both of us to do what we do and to build the life that we want to build. So it's really, I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm very lucky to have this partnership, right, with my partner. So that I think I'm one of very few very lucky women in that respect, where we didn't have to necessarily juggle as much as many have to with dual career households, which is also a very tough balance in that.
Gosh, I love that he's the lid to your pot. And I've never heard that phrase before, but I love it that it's your career, that it's our career, not your individual career or your husband's individual career. It's interesting because I would say the vast majority of women that we have profiled on panels that we've hosted since when the organization first got started 10 and a half years ago to present day, and many of our guests on Hear Her Story, we've heard of this, when their career rose and when it was decided that, they professionally wanted to advance, and that perhaps they were the more significant breadwinner or the one who was advancing at a more significant pace. that, they luckily had a spouse who was supportive and a partner, and was kind of all in to perhaps take a pause or a position that did not require them to travel, or that they weren't on the same trajectory. So it seems to be a common trend that we see with many of these women like you, who have had very successful careers, that often, that's had to be a decision that's made by a couple, because it's really tough to have two people on the same pace and the same path for advancement, and to do that successfully without lots of support.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree.
Definitely. So I know you've had a very successful career, lived in multiple countries, worked for some great companies, including your present day company. Were there any challenges that you've had along the way that stand out, and any lessons learned from some of those challenges that you may have had?
Where do I start? I live for this challenge, right? It's one of the things I do love about my career and my life. It's never easy, right? If it's easy, it's boring. I'd say the challenges are not typically external. It's how we take them, right? It's really how you react to things that happen. Not everything that happens in the world is about you, right? We live in an incredibly challenging situation that is honestly the only insurmountable challenge, I think, is, war, disease, death, all of the horrible things that we as a humanity have to deal with, right? That I don't quite know how to tackle this challenge yet, other than just try to be a good person and help people as much as you can in those tragic circumstances, such as, obviously what's on my mind is the Russia-Ukraine war and COVID pandemic and all these macro events that are real challenges. Everything else compared to that, honestly, are little challenges, right? And they're fun. There are business challenges, of course, the commercial success, or, is your product resonating in the market? Or do you have margin challenges because there's inflation and your price is not catching up because you have a massive backlog? All those things are solvable, right? The way I look at it, it's let's look at the problem. Let's define what the problem statement is, break it down. How do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece, right? You break down the problem, the challenge, and you start tackling it, and you take steps. Sometimes there are missteps. You come back and you learn, but you keep doing, you keep trying. I learned early on that don't let you through the door, climb through the window, right? The same thing with challenges. If you just reframe, and you can tackle almost anything, right? Again, I'm not talking about the big macro things. I'm talking about, just the everyday challenges of the business challenges, right? Even, what you and I talked about earlier. On a macro level, there's a huge supply chain disruption globally, logistics, component shortages, and yet you can't just, drop everything and say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. Sorry, customers, right? You keep trying. You keep trying to find a way. You keep trying to find alternative suppliers. You re-engineer. You go plead, beg, borrow. Don't steal. But find ways. Every day, find ways to chip away and tackle those big and small challenges, right? So is there something, it's a very long-winded answer to your question. There are some insurmountable, I think that the biggest challenges that stand out are more on the personal side, right? Like not challenges, but again, tough things such as, losing my father-in-law to cancer, right? That's a challenge. That's more than a challenge. That's something that, you have to live through with your family and support each other. The work stuff, I thrive on this. I love it. And I love having a team with whom we can collaborate and figure out how to tackle those fun challenges.
Yeah. I think great advice. As you said, breaking things down, doing things in micro pieces as you're looking at how, especially some of those professional challenges, how do you work or navigate through them? Change isn't going to happen. You're not going to solve that problem, especially if it's a bigger one immediately. So I think, some great advice. And then, as you said, putting things into perspective. I mean, there are major challenges that our country is being faced with, that our culture, our workforce is being challenged with. And so I likewise to you, some of those small business challenges are kind of fun to get to dissect. It's usually not life impacting. Those things as to how do I improve efficiency on this process. It's more of that problem solving piece that I think you spoke to earlier, where no day of yours is the same. Each day is kind of a fun mix. And that's what we hear from so many women in manufacturing connected careers, is that they like that piece of the lack of routine, and that there are lots of curveballs thrown your way. But I think most women leaders in manufacturing and in our industry are expert problem solvers.
Right.
They are very collaborative. You've talked about your team a lot. Again, bringing in those right resources and people. So I think that those challenges are very surmountable. And I think that it's finding, again, how we dissect and overcome those challenges.
100%. 100% agree.
Don't miss the opportunity to nominate an incredible woman from your network to be honored in the Women in Manufacturing Hall of Fame. For the third year in a row, we're recognizing women who are leaving their mark on the manufacturing industry through their efforts to support, promote, and inspire other women in industry. Since the WiM Hall of Fame's inception in 2020, 24 trailblazing women in manufacturing have been inducted into this prestigious group of manufacturing leaders. Nominate a leader from your company or professional network before June 15th. Additional information can be found at www.womeninmanufacturing.org.
So as we wrap up our conversations with all of our guests on Hear Her Story, we usually like to entertain our listeners with a bit of rapid fire questioning. So as we go through, we're going to kind of learn just a little bit more about you. And the first rapid fire question that we have is, what is your favorite quote and why?
Be the change you'd like to see in the world. I hope I'm quoting this correctly. Mahatma Gandhi. I think to our conversation about challenges, it's how you take things thrown at you and what you do with them. Every challenge is an opportunity. I love that. And I also don't believe in victim mentality. So it's things are not happening to you. When you can, take an active stance and change things that you don't like and help others change and be positive about it.
Great advice. And what is your favorite book?
Master and Margarita. I'm speaking in Russian right now. So in Russian, it's in English, it's Master and Margarita. It's Bulgakov. Mikhail Bulgakov was a Russian writer who was persecuted during Stalin's time, but fortunately he survived. His works were not published for decades, and my parents actually kept his books, illegally reprinted books, in our house, and we actually distributed that across our friends and neighbors where we felt safe. And it's just amazing literature. It's really philosophical, but also wildly entertaining. And I even got my American husband to read it, and he actually enjoyed it. So it's translated into English. It's a work of fiction, but it's also very deep and very fun. So it has witches in it, and it has Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ, as well as 1920s Moscow corruption. So it has everything in it, and it's a beautifully written book.
I'll have to check it out. I've never heard of it. Master and Margarita.
Yeah.
And your favorite movie?
Pulp Fiction. Tarantino, pretty much almost every Tarantino movie. I didn't like Hateful Eight that much, but that's an outlier. So any Tarantino movie.
That is unique. I don't think anyone's ever mentioned a Tarantino movie. My husband is an avid Tarantino lover, and to me, they're a bit gory, bloody, many of them. And he's had me watch The Hateful Eight many times, and that one is especially a bit gory.
That one, see, Hateful Eight was a little, I know it's artistic value, but it's not as fun and entertaining. I take Tarantino's movie, the blood in Tarantino movies like ketchup. So like my view of entertainment, I have enough of heavy stuff in life. So I just want something that is fun and very far from life. And Tarantino's movies are fantasy. Yeah, granted, a little edgy. But I love Inglourious Bastards as well. It's a fun one. So he does revenge theme pretty well, and he does, he's entertaining.
And the last place you traveled?
France and Finland. So I just came back from visiting customers and teams in our Paris, Lyon, and Helsinki offices and around that, and just incredibly beautiful, both countries and cultures and people, and just really it was a business trip, but I got to see a little bit of Lyon as well, which was my first time in Lyon. That's just so beautiful. Love Europe.
I love Europe as well. And I think you mentioned your first job that you ever had. So it sounds like you did lots of sitting, babysitting, puppy sitting.
I did.
And
Tutor.
I
I
love
was
your
a tutor.
sandwich artist.
Yes, I did. I was a tutor as well in like 6 subjects. So, so the first job, official job with a paycheck, was Subway sandwich artist. I still have the shirt. I still remember the smell. Your clothes, your hair, everything smells like Subway for years after you work there. So.
I love it. And what goals have you set for yourself personally and professionally this year?
So, and it was, to me, and I know that I keep harping on this, but it is important for me, you know, what happened before February 24th and what happened after February 24th this year, 2 different things. You know, my personal goal, that doesn't change. My daughter is 16, going on 17. She will be finishing her junior year in high school. And I want to make sure that she chooses the university that she's happy about and she gets in. So we have college tours ahead of us, and the exciting and nervous time of getting your oldest kid to decide what they want to do in life and start the next chapter. So that's the personal piece, is to make sure my daughter picks what she wants and where she will be happy. But the other piece of it, after February 24th, just helping my friends and close friends to get through what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, and helping as many families as we can to either get out or actually get out, because there's not much I can do otherwise other than just sending money and aid to Ukraine. So that's kind of on the personal side. Professional side, where challenging circumstances, inflation, fulfillment issues, service is important, very important, and it's also a way to bring value even with the component shortages. So growing the business 5.2% year on year is my target, and setting ourselves up for success midterm and long term as we create new service offerings for our customers that are beyond break fix.
And how do you spend your downtime?
Movies. I believe Ozark, we're not done with that yet. So I'm a Netflix, we are as a family are in Netflix, Amazon Prime, HBO Plus addicts, meaning it gets serious. We're talking binge marathons of watching anything from Emily in Paris to Ozark, right? So that's, and travel as much as we can. Even during the pandemic, we would go, oh my gosh, we got so desperate, we went to Joliet, Illinois, which is an hour drive from Chicago, to visit a state prison, because that's where Blues Brothers were shot, the opening scene. I mean, we were running out of ideas to just get out of the house and see something. So the upcoming trip, about a week and a half from now, we're going to go to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Just meet my friends from Canada and hang out and check out the breweries and the museums, and then come back. So
Grand Rapids is a beautiful city. I love it.
Never been. So
yeah. And it's really great. It's got a great downtown, great dining, and it's so clean and beautiful. It's a very nice city.
Really looking forward to it. So those trips, big and small, travel and film and TV, that's what we.
Thank God for streaming services during the
yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
And then as we wrap up our conversation, what is the one piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are potentially aspiring women and or current women in industry?
I actually had a surprise recently for International Women's Day, March 8th. Some ladies at work, some leaders, they were sending flowers to other women leaders, and it was just super inspiring what they wrote to me. And they had personalized messages come with a bouquet of flowers, just made my day. It was super sweet message. And what they actually used there was a quote by Ayn Rand that is actually standing on my desk right now. And it says, the question isn't who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me. And I just love that quote, because I mentor a lot of people. I have a lot of folks who helped me and who I've been helping grow from a professional standpoint and career and making decisions. I think that's important to remember, that you don't have to always ask for permission. Just dare and go. And of course, stay within, be a good person, don't do anything illegal, but really push the boundaries and be brave, right? So That's
Yeah.
the,
That's great advice. Well, what a great conversation, Alla. It was so fun to get to chat with you and learn more about you. And what an interesting story and journey that you've had, from the past to present. And I'm just so happy that you're connected to WiM, that you're part of our member community, and that we have, your expertise and insights to share with our audience today. So thanks for being a guest.
awesome. Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you for your fantastic and insightful questions. And thank you, WiM, for connecting incredible leaders.
Thank you for listening to Hear Her Story, a podcast produced by the Women in Manufacturing Association. Be sure to share, review, and subscribe to Hear Her Story on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. In the past 10 years, more than 3,000 new apprenticeship programs have been established within U.S. manufacturing, representing 128% growth within the industry. This isn't surprising since registered apprenticeship programs give employers access to a diverse pool of talented potential employees. The Women in Manufacturing Association has partnered with Jobs for the Future to connect our members and their companies with a streamlined way of recruiting, retaining, and training women in manufacturing through their own registered apprenticeship programs. For more information on how to build your own registered apprenticeship program, please visit our website at womeninmanufacturing.org.